question. I mean, the big thing right now is the blaming the unjabbed. If it wasn't for the unjabbed, this Omicron variant wouldn't have appeared. If it wasn't for the unjabbed, it wouldn't be spreading. If it wasn't for the unjabbed, we wouldn't have the NHS under pressure. Well, in Ireland, the vast majority of people who are jabbed have got a much higher rate even than us, and yet they've still got this variant, and they've still got cases rising. There is this desire to come up with doing something, even though it doesn't do anything, but it's just doing something so we can have the appearance of control. But also this urge to blame a group of people for the health choices they've made, even if I disagree with those health choices, but I absolutely support the right of people to make the wrong decision about their own bodies, because that's what freedom is. If nothing else, that is what freedom is. But are you worried about this sinister turn that there is clearly a concerted effort now to point the finger at the unjabbed and blame them?
Yes, that's a form of othering, and that obviously is dangerous, given the fundamental right to bodily autonomy, and the progression that we've made in our society since we did have mandatory vaccination in the 19th century, which didn't work. It didn't work in Leicester, for example, when it was imposed. And there are various stories about that. But this, again, it goes back to the normalization of public health justifying restrictions on the whole of society. We've never before seen that, save in the Middle Ages. And we simply haven't seen it in the modern era. The state has a duty to protect people by preventing them from doing things. Of course, the state has a duty to advise people. Of course, the state has a duty to be honest. And if evidence does suggest that masks work, they don't, because if they did, we'd have seen a change in the trajectory of infections in every territory where they were introduced. And we've seen no evidence at all in any territory where they were introduced. And that's the only measure that the government has done, apart from a bit of extra self-isolation. So if those measures work, then advise people to use them. That's how a free society works. And we have to be able to quantify, we have to be able to deal with risk. And risk is an essential part of being a human being. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a speed limit of 70 miles an hour on motorways. We know that people
we'd have a speed limit of 10, wouldn't we? I mean, that's the thing. We accept those trade-offs, don't we? Can I ask you just finally, just because I know a lot of people are really troubled by this mask mandate. It's been in, obviously, Wales and Scotland for a long time. How's that working for them with higher case rates? But in England, it's just been brought in a week or so ago. We've seen some videos on social media of police arresting a man who apparently had the wrong attitude about not wearing a mask. But he said to the police very clearly, I have a mask exemption. They were asking him more and more details. Can you just clarify for people just briefly, like what the law is? If someone says they have an exemption, they don't need a doctor's letter. They don't need to provide proof at all. It's entirely a subjective view. If you find wearing a mask, as I do, severely distressing, because it is severely distressing to be forced to do something so completely stupid, then you are entitled not to wear a mask. And that's the end of the matter.
Well, first of all, so far as shops and non-regulated people are concerned, questioning somebody who says that they have an exemption when they have no reason to believe that they don't is potentially a discriminatory act, because they could be disabled and they could have a reason that's connected to their disability. And so they could be discriminating against them. The police do have the right to inquire and do have the right to check whether they have reasonable suspicion if there's been an offence. But if somebody, again, tells the police, I have an exemption, they do not have reasonable suspicion that that person is lying. We do not live in a state, or we thought we didn't live in a police state where the police assume that the public is lying to them and assume that they have the right to interrogate them in their most personal details in a public place. They do not have that right. Absolutely. Police officers do not have a reasonable suspicion that somebody is committing an offence if they say that they are exempt. Because if they say they are exempt, the police officers should believe them unless they have good reason to disbelieve them.
Absolutely. Francis Hoar, really good to get